All right, guys, today's video is deer recovery part 3. I am doing supplemental feeding, and we're going to focus on this portion of getting deer to recover and help out that next generation. I am a firm believer that supplemental feeding makes deer bigger, and this provides a golden opportunity to remove parasites off a deer, or at the very least, you can reduce them. And parasites will have its own video because it is really bad as far as limiting deer in size. So first off, why would I even remotely trust that supplemental feeding works? The basic goal of this particular blend is it is loaded with trace minerals. The protein level varies a bit. It can be 12% up to 15%. And I prefer a blend 20 or higher on the protein feed. There's also what we call essential oils that bucks need when they're growing their antlers. You may not realize this, but when deer are in velvet, that shiny look you see when they're standing out in the sunlight, when they're in velvet, that is an enzyme or an oil that deer produces in the velvet to give it that shiny reflective look. It serves as an insect repellent. Guys, I don't know if you realize that or not, but that is a super rare ability that people may not understand about whitetail deer. They actually produce an essential oil that is a natural insect repellent to keep the insects from damaging their antlers. And if they have a deficiency, they cannot properly produce that enzyme or that oil, then the insects can penetrate into those antlers and do damage. So you may see those pitted out holes in the beams where insects did that. It also weakens the antler at that specific point, and it could be broken off during a fight. So I'm trying to do as much protection as possible when it comes to growing bucks. I prefer those antlers to be intact. So let's go into my common sense theme for me on why I believe supplemental feeding works. This food plot's a great example. So if I'm building a food plot, if I take the time to do this, excuse me one second. Ooh, throat is dry. Basically, I'm telling myself I do not trust the amount of food that I have on my property. So I build a food plot, I set out all kinds of food. Obviously, for growing purposes, it needs to be a lot bigger than this. But the amount of food that I have provided in here is a lot higher than what, this whole ridge is making right now. And then we discover the second part to this. Not only did I not trust the food supply on my property, now I don't trust the soil to build the food supply. So what happens is if a deer's coming in here, it's now getting food, which I've taken care of that, but it needs better nutrition. Because this ground here is such an early stage of development, the nutrition level will be a lot higher here when I'm done with it. But it is improving, so it would improve my deer. Now, what happens when deer leave this particular spot? They're right back into poor soil. The woods does a fantastic job of masking and hiding just how bad soil can be. So if you're new to this, you're looking into your woods, you may not really realize there's not hardly any food in there at all, guys. And what is in there is lacking in good quality nutrition. So that is why I have to use supplemental feeding to make up for what is lacking on this ridge. It is also making up for bad soil out in the field. It is making up for bad soil around my property. Generally, what I recommend is one feeding station for every 60 acres. If you own 65 acres, that's up to you. Do you want to put 2 food stations out? Do you want to leave it at 1? Let your deer density kind of play a factor into that. If you have a really high deer density, you might want to make 2 feeding stations. But generally 60 acres is the golden number for me. So if I don't own 60 acres, I own the 24 and some change. So even if you're under 60, you still need at least one feeding station to help your deer out. And there's also, well, let me get over here and talk about the blend a little bit. Now, what type of feed tends to work the best? Well, that's a question that really can't be answered unless you know it's providing what you need. Check off your protein and check off your trace minerals, and I think you're good. If your supplemental feed is a mineral lick that you throw out on the soil or a stump or whatever, what is the contents of that lick? Is it 90% salt? Is it 80% salt? Is it 60% salt? A lot of people get lost when it comes to supplemental feeding and assume that they go out and buy a mineral brick or whatever it is you want to buy from the store. If you don't read what's on the back of that bag, you're really getting scammed to me. If you have a mineral lick that is 90% salt, that is not a mineral lick. You're missing the key term into minerals. So what's particularly in this blend, there's wheat that's been ground up into this. There's a little bit of corn. There is, oh heck, what was that other plant that was in here? It's a sorghum. It's a little bit of clover mix in here. There's things that you can actually grind up and make pellets with. There's a machine that you can purchase and make your own pellets. So if you want essential oils, you're going to have to learn about the deer's anatomy more. And I will get into essential oils in a separate video. I just kind of lightly wanted to touch on that. But one of the other mistakes I find when it comes to supplemental feeding is this particular guy right here, which if I can get him to come out, right here we go. To me, if you're using pure corn as a supplemental feed, you're not going to get the best return out of your deer. Corn is a carbohydrate producer. It doesn't have a lot of nutrition with it, so you're actually giving deer energy, which, you know, it may look like they're amped up a little bit more because that's the extra carbs that corn produces, but you need those extra vitamins and minerals in order to get these deer to the next step. And that is one of the big reasons why I do supplemental feeding. There's plenty of studies that show that it does work. Bucks on supplemental feeding tend to average an extra 15% in antler size. You may see a 10 to 15% jump in weight, especially if you do large amounts of feeding. And this can add up pretty quickly if you have large tracts of land. So if you use my magic number of 60 per acre, at 600 acres, you're already up to 10 feeders. And imagine if you have a high deer density, you're going to be eating through feed pretty quick. But for those of you that are really savvy and make your own feeds, that's fantastic. It's probably cheaper for you to do it that way than it is to go buy it in the store. But this particular feed is a horse and cattle, goats, sheep. It's a general purpose feed. And there is one thing of note that I want to talk about. I'm going to touch on this lightly because I will do a video on it, which is part of the recovery series. But ever since I started feeding deer this feed, I have noticed fewer parasites on the deer. There's not as many ticks on the deer. I haven't seen as much lice crawling around on them. And now that these cameras can make some really sharp images, you can zoom in and see that stuff now. A lot of that old tech back in the early 2000s, that would have been hard to do. So cameras have come a long way, and I use that to study my deer, to see where the health of the deer is. And here's another big thing now. I think this is a vital piece of information that maybe some of you don't realize. But supplemental feeding, especially with today's technology, can now save a deer's life, a lot of deer's lives. There is now a EHD preventative technology that several companies have come out with, and when EHD strikes in your region, your deer are protected from EHD and have a much higher success rate of living compared to deer that are not on supplemental feeding. One of the products that I've seen is Real World. They have EHD technology. There are others that do so. But if you're mixing your own, can you make a mix that can provide EHD protection? The answer is yes. You can do it, but you may have to modify your blend in order for it to work. So what is the magic ingredient that can keep deer alive during EHD outbreaks? That is garlic. If you're willing to mix garlic into your feeds, you can save a deer's life with garlic. The properties that garlic give off is expanded blood flow throughout the deer. You are opening up those arteries and expanding the circulation of the deer. That's the only way that that deer is going to survive it. Unless it is an extremely tough animal, then you're going to have a very high mortality rate. So you have to feed these deer in advance and build that particular garlic up in their system, and that way when EHD does strike, your herd is prepared and has a much better chance of surviving. I think that is a huge tool in the right direction. This particular feed has no garlic in it. As of right now, there's no need for garlic. Once the antler growing season comes around, that's a great time to put it in. You're not only expanding blood flow to keep the deer healthier by increasing its circulation, but what happens when you increase the blood flow into a deer? Antlers get bigger. It is a byproduct or a side effect of additional blood flow in the deer. So you can help increase the size of a rack through the use of garlic in your mixes. And first off, if you hear the word garlic, that's going to be a turn off instantly, right? Or you can mask that through, you can mix molasses in there or something sweet to help get rid of that garlic taste or reduce it enough to where deer will still eat this stuff. That's how you do it. If you got something that the deer may not like, mask it through other means. Molasses will work great. You can use that to sweeten everything up and remove a lot of that garlic taste that maybe turns your deer off to your feed. So I hope this helps you guys. EHD has always been a big problem. And then I'm going to tackle the CWD problem, which is the major concern. Obviously, you don't want to eat deer that have CWD. And they tell you if you do kill a deer that has EHD, that you can eat that meat. But I'm not going to do that. I'm playing it safe. I know that we may not necessarily, contract something, but I'm just playing the safeguard on that particular end. And I will give the deer an extra year or two and make sure he's back to being full health again before I decide to harvest that deer. And besides, he will be immune to EHD if he does catch it and survive it, and he can pass on that immunity to the next generation. All right, guys. Again, if you like this content, hit that like and subscribe button. There's going to be more to come on parasites, which is part of the recovery process. And don't forget, also hit that notification bell so you can get the latest news when I start posting more videos on this. But again, supplemental feeding works, and there's all kinds of studies that show it does. You all have a fantastic day.